not just for my students to listen and learn from our esteemed speaker and reactors, but also to open the opportunity to interested scholars and audiences so they will be properly updated or informed about Myanmar. It could be said that human rights are more or most vital component of human existence as well as continuity. It is the fundamental values in which each and everyone, including governments, must religiously observe to ensure the continuity of life, either belonging to individual self, to community, to nation, or to the entire human race. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, in its preamble, speaks about, and I quote, recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Viewing from this principle, it is therefore important to note that human rights issues are something that should be accorded proper and appropriate consideration in the policies and declarations of the state. By essence, human rights are universal and therefore these should be universally recognized and respected of political ideology, race, economic status, cultural background, etc. However, a quick glance to the status of human rights regimes in different countries and regions in the world would probably tell us that human rights issues are seen differently by the governments and peoples of other countries. While many countries in the global north, as well as some countries in the global south, adhere to its universality, some countries in the global south, however, perceive the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights differently. The divergence of perspectives has resulted into a debate between the universality and of its relativity. In Asia, for example, throughout the 1990s, we have heard about the ASEAN or Asian values debate, which concerns about the compatibility of the universal human rights and values to the concepts of rights and values of the ASEAN or Asian people. Although the debate is somewhat waning nowadays, it had incited controversies in many respects. In bringing the issue of human rights in the framework of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, one may observe that almost all, if not all 10 ASEAN countries signify support to the Declaration of Human Rights. In the webpage of ASEAN regarding the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration published on November 19, 2012, it clearly stated, and I quote, that ASEAN reaffirm its adherence to the purposes and principle of the organization as enshrined in the ASEAN Charter, in particular, the respect for the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedom, as well as the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and good governance. Further reaffirming our commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the United Nations, the Vienna Conventions and Program of Action, and other international human rights instruments to which ASEAN member states are parties. And lastly, it also reaffirms the importance of ASEAN's efforts in promoting human rights, including the Declaration of the Advancement of Women in the ASEAN region and the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence against Women in the ASEAN region. This is indeed a beautiful or wonderful declaration. Moreover, it is also within this framework that I want to ask how effective is ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights in cases where the principle of sovereignty and non-intervention are put forward by the ASEAN member states allegedly committing human rights violations or abuses. If ASEAN member countries clearly states that they commit to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other human rights conventions and agreement, would it then be possible for ASEAN as an organization to sanction an ASEAN member country committing human rights abuses? Tonight's forum will hopefully shed us light on the case of Myanmar, specifically on how the government of Myanmar protect its people regardless of their ethnicity and religious affiliation. It hopes to shed light what the government policies are in terms of protecting the rights of the Rohingya people in particular. I hope that our participants will listen attentively to our speakers, and I hope to witness a stimulating exchange or exchanges of ideas in the question and answer portion. Once again, in behalf of the Philippine Studies Class 282 and the UP Asian Center, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you in this forum. Maraming salamat at magandang gabi.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Sevilla, for your welcome remarks. Again, let us give Dr. Sevilla a big hand. So moving on to our program at this juncture, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker for this webinar. It is my honor and privilege to introduce this esteemed guest speaker that we have this afternoon. She is Indonesia's representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or AICHR. From 2014 to 2018, she worked as the senior advisor to the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, or APHR, a regional network of current and former parliamentarians who use their unique positions to advance human rights and democracy in Southeast Asia. In the same period, she also worked as the team leader of the EU-ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue Human Rights Facility. Before working in the ASEAN, she worked in various international and non-governmental organizations, such as Oxfam International, Forum Asia, Child Workers in Asia, Terre de Homes Netherlands, American Center for International Solidarity, and the Indonesian National Commission for Child Protection. She is currently a PhD candidate at the Global Governance Law and Social Justice at the International Institute of Social Justice in The Hague Erasmus University, Rotterdam. She has a master's degree in human rights from Mahidol University, Thailand, and a diploma in library science from the University of Indonesia. Please help me welcome Her Excellency Yuyun Wayuningrum. Hello, ma'am. Salamat suri.
Thank you very much. Selamat sore, Julius. Thank you for having me today and tonight. It is an honor for me to be here. I've prepared my presentation and I would like to directly go to my screen share. Oh, okay. I might be able to answer. Some of them I do not want to answer, especially the role of the Philippines. I think this is something that we can discuss further rather than I make some comments on what Philippines should do. But we can, of course, explore all possibilities during the question and answer. And I put, I collected and grouped the questions into at least 5 points. First, on universalism of human rights in ASEAN member states. and second on ASEAN human rights and Indonesia, and the third, human rights in Myanmar, Rohingya, and the role of ASEAN on the 5-point consensus, especially on the implementation and civil war in Myanmar, and the issue related to the accountability and ASEAN. I would like to start with universalism. I think our discussion today in 2022 should be different from our discussion in 1993, in which universalism and particularism continue to be discussed and debated. I'm happy that the question is rather looking at the application. So to assess this, the application of universalism of human rights in the ASEAN member states, not in ASEAN, but the member states, I would like to invite students as well as the participants to look at the assessing through the national commitment and engagement of ASEAN member states, as well as to look at the compliance of the implementation through the reports and the process of how this domestication of human rights appear at the regional norm setting, or I call this as ASEAN member state norm diffusion at the regional level. I'm not sure if you can see me because my camera seems off. All right. All right. So as of now, 10 ASEAN member states have domesticated the human rights into their constitution. I will present you the table on this to look at which article in the constitution mention about human rights, and the ratification of ASEAN member state to international human rights law, and national mechanisms established in ASEAN member states to address the human rights grievances. To be able to understand whether ASEAN member states comply with human rights, I think it would be good to look at the country treaty reports on the convention that ASEAN member state ratified, UPR report, Universal Periodic Review reports, as well as SDG reports. I choose not to explore this because we are going to have a one whole session to discuss about these three reports. So I would like to invite everyone to check the country reports as well as UPR reports by yourself. And I think the more important thing on what a dynamic at the national level influence or shape the norms at the regional level is to look at how member states bring these ideas of human rights into the shape of human rights, as we can see when ASEAN member states discuss the Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter. It was about, the Article 14 is about establishing the ASEAN Human Rights Body. The discussion took place in the region 2016-2007, no, 2006-2007, sorry, typo. And then the TOR of Eicher, the discussion was in 2008, 2009, not 2018, 2000, another typo here. And then a development of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. I just would like to make some summary of the discussion. Member states felt still negotiating and compromising number of universalism of human rights in the process of developing Article 14 in the ASEAN Charter and the TOR. And when ASEAN members that discuss about ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, it come to clear that member states refuse. It is not the universalism that ASEAN member state against. It's rather uniformity. ASEAN member state embrace universalism. I think that's how they were. The discussion had been done, but rather to unify everything. Every country should be the same pace, the same form, has to establish this and that, like uniformity across countries in the region. That's something that member states against or disagree on. So these are our state of discussion in terms of universalism of human rights. I think when you look at the country reports and UPR reports, you will look at what in human rights that member states disagree. Because in 1993, they discuss about human rights as human rights. It is not necessarily looking at the detail of it, whether member state against the anti-torture or nationality or the right to nationality or not. So it's more big idea on human rights that discussed in 1993. Now, some countries already ratified the convention, domesticate human rights into constitution. The discussion should not only limit on the big idea of human rights, but look at what in human rights that members agree or disagree or follow or comply or not to comply. So I would like to give this as a framework to elaborate further on universalism of human rights in Southeast Asia or in ASEAN member states. Now, on the constitution, as you can see here, all 10 ASEAN member states have included human rights into their constitution, unless for Brunei. I think no specific section on human rights in the constitution of Brunei, but all countries here included human rights in different type, in different kind of human rights and so on and so forth. But human rights for citizen and non-citizen are guaranteed in the constitutions of some ASEAN member states. And 5 national human institutions established in Southeast Asia countries or ASEAN countries. Cambodia is in the process of establishing one. We hope to have one this year. But Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand have established national human institution with different powers, as you can see here in the table. And then member states in ASEAN ratified the convention. The most convention, the convention that ratified the most by member states are CEDAW on discrimination against women, CRC on the right of the child, and CRPD on the right of person with disabilities. The rest, some countries have not yet ratified the convention with so many reasons, but during UPR, so instead of, even though some member state did not ratify ICCPR, for instance, in Convention on Civil Political Rights, but then in UPR process, Universal Periodic Review process, the issues in relation to civil political rights also can be discussed. So this is a system established at the international level, which try to find some possibilities to discuss issues that are not ratified or by member states. And now, in the question in relation to ASEAN human rights and Indonesia, in relation to what are the pressing issues of human rights in ASEAN. So perhaps I would like to rather offer this kind of perspective that at the regional level, usually there are 3 categories in which we can look at human rights issues as the responsibility of regional organization like AICHR or ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. First, with the category, with the regionality character into a cross-border characteristic, transboundary, or common concerns. Cross-border is like, the issue crossing the border require more one country to discuss and address the problem, such as trafficking in person, migrant workers, refugees, asylum seekers. Transboundary characteristic, the issue perhaps only happen in one country, but the effect of this issue spread out to neighbors, such as haze or other environmental issues, river, the pollution of river, for instance. So these are the issues that consider as a regional issue. And then common concern. Common concern is not necessarily fall under cross-border or transboundary, but becoming the interest of more other of the member states. So, for instance, freedom of expression opinion. At the moment, member states are feeling not awkward, but I think each member state in ASEAN or other region have difficulties in dealing with digital freedom of expression. How to deal with this? So it become a concern of many member states how to deal with the issue, and therefore they need to have a platform to share experiences and practices. Freedom of association is another concerns that exist in almost all member states in ASEAN. Health crisis, like what we are experiencing since 2020, pandemic COVID-19, and also digital rights. So these are some of the issues that ASEAN is expected to look at. Some countries also come up with very specific issues, but as long as country can deal with the problem, the role of regional human rights institution is to only to monitor. But the issue of trafficking person require an active role from ICHR and also from ASEAN to provide a platform for discussion, to platform for cooperation, sharing of information, and so on and so forth. So what are Indonesia's best practices? I think Indonesia, as similar with other countries, always try what it should be doing as a country, as a duty bearers of human rights. It can be considered as best practices. It sometimes also fail, but it is good to recognize the failure, to be able to combat better on the approaches. But I would like to look at all some of the examples, like for instance, create a platform for learning at the village level, sharing experiences and dialogue in making decision, in initiatives on behavior change of the duty holders, duty bearers, all the time. So like for instance, training for interview technique to avoid or to prevent torture happen in police offices, public participation and consultation mechanism for grievances. Now Indonesia has a lot of mechanism for grievances because Indonesia has a very big population. So mechanism for grievances would be established in the closest area to the citizens, such as village or lower than village, because some villages in Java Island has become big enough. So mechanism for grievances is very important for people to come forward and to tell the governments on their problems. And also human rights-based approach in terms of planning. So I have been witnessing the planning from, we call it Bapenas, the planning agency, has been using human rights-based approach in their development planning, and it is actually useful, as well as on addressing the issue of security on, for instance, on terrorism. Human rights-based approach has been used rather than security approach to the issue of terrorism. Civilian supremacy, rule of law, and human rights city. In Indonesia, we have a number of human rights cities, smart cities, women and children-friendly cities, and so on and so forth. So now the responsibilities of promoting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights gradually transferred to the local level, so people feel that their rights are actually fulfilled by government. So that's some of the
Julius, I think we lost Miss Yu Yuan.
Yes, I think we're having a technical difficulty to Miss Yuyun's side. Hello, Miss Yuyun. Hello, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear po.
Ah. Okay, so let me go back.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so here. So I was in the slide on human rights in Myanmar. Um, so from the guided questions, I have an assumption that participants already know what is actually happening in Myanmar. So that is why I did not explain what is actually happening, but rather focus more on responses from ASEAN or ICHR. I would like to start, and I found there are two questions in relation to non-interference and non-intervention in the guided question. Maybe we can also discuss this later on. I would like to first introduce ICHR and how this body respond human rights situation or issues in the region. ICHR has 14 mandates, which in this presentation, I clamp them down into 6 functions to make it easier. So if you ask what is the role of ICHR in terms of protecting the right of migrant workers, so these are some of the keywords here can give you some of the ideas. So for instance, ICHR has a role to develop standards in relation to the respect, protect, fulfill human rights of migrant workers. ICHR has a role to come up with the cooperation and policy support for ASEAN member states and ASEAN sectoral bodies in relation to the right of migrant workers. ICHR has responsibility to protect the right of migrant workers. ICHR has responsibility to come up with human rights strategy in relation to the promotion and protection of the right of migrant workers, doing research, having a capacity building activities, as well as dialogue and engagement. So these 6 areas are the summary of the 14 mandates that ICHR has so far. And as for the history, ICHR was established in 2009 based on Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter. It has 14 mandates I mentioned earlier. Beside of the TOR, ICHR also work based on the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. It has 10 representatives from 10 ASEAN member states. One of the purposes of ASEAN ICHR is to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedom of the ASEAN of the people in ASEAN, of the people of ASEAN, not only in ASEAN, because some people of ASEAN also reside in different countries beyond ASEAN region. And another purpose that I would like to highlight here is ICHR purpose is to complement national and international efforts to promote and protect human rights. So ICHR, the establishment of this regional human rights mechanism should not compete with the existing national mechanism or the international mechanism, but rather to complement to each other. That's usually the division of role of different level of human rights mechanism. ICHR report to the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting every year, usually in July or August. Minimum, ICHR meet twice, but now in the last 10 years, ICHR met 4 times in a year. The ways of working of ICHR follow the ASEAN consensus, consultative, non-interference, evolutionary approach. It is intergovernmental. It's also consultative way of doing things. And so far, so ICHR.
Excuse me, Miss Yu Yun. We cannot hear your audio po. Yeah. I think we're having again a technical problem with your audio.
That's
There you go. We can hear you now.
yes, yes, yes. Sorry.
No worries.
So we have now a complaint mechanism. It is not ideal one. We call it step 3 or 3-step complaint mechanism. We receive complaint mechanism. We receive complaints
Google Classroom,
through the email address
naghihatag na ko ang assignment,
ichur@asean.org,
then
and
start
then
answering.
ASEAN Secretariat will table
You can,
this
excuse me
complaint
for a while.
in the iChur meeting, and the country subject to the complaint will
Hello.
follow up the incoming complaint. So this is not ideal as a complaint mechanism, but
Tagbo ko
this is
pangita
something that
lagi
we have
dire or
agreed
nara diha. Sila kadit lang kung
as
pangita
of November
nara diha na
2019, and we need to
pakuhan nas mama ni mo be,
improve
kuha nas mama ni mo
this kind of complaint mechanism.
Palihog.
So far, I received 1 or 2 complaints from Indonesia,
sorry,
and
Gracia,
I've
sorry.
already followed it up to
So you
the,
can click the link.
on the cases and report it back
It will
to
open
iChur.
at exactly 6 o'clock.
Since
So you
there was a
have
question on
less
non-interference,
than 20 minutes
so
more. No? You can open all.
iChur
You can have your
has agenda
references.
item 4
But of
now
course, class,
in its
the
regular
time is limited.
meeting. Agenda item
So
4
we have
is the
40
update of from
quiz,
iChur representative on recent
questions
development in
in this
ASEAN.
quiz.
It
Then
means each
your time will
representative
be
of human rights of iChur can
80
talk
minutes.
about human rights issues of other countries without
80 minutes
being
sometime.
accused of breaching the non-interference
Because
principle.
1 hour and 20 minutes or 80
Non-interference
minutes.
and non-intervention is
And
two
for
different
40
things.
questionnaires,
Non-intervention
40
is
questions, you have 2
physically
minutes to answer
intervening,
in this question.
annex to the country, and we don't
2 minutes
accept
answer.
that. Yeah,
Clear,
around
class,
the world do
understood?
not accept that kind of annexation. But
Kasi itong akong
non-interference usually
kuan primero nga 3
means
minutes. You have
that
only
do
2
not
minutes per
mingle
question.
with
So
my problem.
you can
So
open
that's
everything. Pwede ninyo
domestic problems.
matanaw.
So when I start
ma-references
my
ninyo
work
kung naka
as iChur representative in
kuan mo atong
2019,
sa mga
I
gipag-discuss
table
nato. Naran ni tanan dito.
the issue of
My
Rohingya
questions
all
are
the
very
time,
simple.
but it got no consensus, and
So
always the argument
lastly,
was about
after
that you are breaching the non-interference principle.
no, the questions,
But then in
submit your
2021,
response before the time.
we managed to establish the agenda
status
specifically
bar
to talk about human rights issues of the ASEAN member states without being with the agreement that the discussion on human rights issue of other countries will not intervening, will not be
before mo
accused
end,
of breach
before
the
sa
non-interference
7:20 class, kinahanglan inyo ginang
and
i-submit
then
siya.
another
Because
initiative that we already
Google Classroom
introduced,
or
which is the
My
ASEAN Human Rights
Drive
Dialogue. Many Indonesian
will no longer
governments
accept
call it as
sa
mini UPR, Universal Periodic
beyond
Review.
7:20.
This is the
No?
time in which member
It will
states
no
talk
longer
about
accept
human
sa
rights of their
beyond
own
7:20 nga
countries
time.
in the ASEAN
So 1 hour,
platform,
taas
in
na
the
ka ng
ASEAN
1 hour
forum,
kuan kaya ang akong
and then we can
questions
question
patiran sa una.
other countries
Then
on
after
their
submitting,
on their issues
you
and
must tune into
on their
the assignment side of our Google Classroom,
achievement
diba?
without
Assignment
being
side diha, then
accused of
question.
non-interference principle.
Kinahanglan mo tune in mo dito mo.
So these are two examples
Adto mo dito.
in which iChur, as a human
Mo
rights
open mo sa
body,
Google Classroom.
try to work
Yan ay
within
classwork.
our limitation.
Then
So the
na midterm
non-interference
exam,
principle is
so
there in ASEAN
pwede
Charter.
mo tune in diha.
It is also it become the ASEAN
Okay.
way, but
So
we can always find
for-
ways how to go about
for
it.
everybody's
And
information
we
class,
created an agenda, we
ang
created
ato
a
ang
platform,
walay
so
ang questions na
will
to
not
reshuffled na
spill
siya.
over to different occasions.
Reshuffled.
So that's
dili mo
one way we one way of
kuan sa inyong mga
many
kauban o
efforts
pareha ba mo
that ASEAN
arrangement ang
individual countries or
inyong
sectoral
answers, no?
bodies or
Ang seleksyon ninyo,
organs in ASEAN try to
ang
work
option
within
ninyo nga upat
our
ka buok,
limitation
dili mo
in
parehas
ASEAN
tanan.
way.
Kamutanan
Five-Year Core Plan
girisapol yun sa tanan lain-lain mo.
2021-2025
So,
also
for example,
include number of
inyong labilan og
lacking of
ABCD
protection
ang upat.
mandates. So for instance, on remedies,
Moingon mo nga
grievance
inyong classmates
mechanism,
nga
grievance mechanism is
sa
almost
first
similar with
question
complaint mechanism,
kanang
referral
mauna.
system, human rights
Sa question number
index,
1
country
mauna.
visit. So
So,
these are some of the
your question number 1
possible
is different from
initiatives
question
to
number 1 of
improve the
each
work
of you.
of ICHR. Despite all
No,
limitations
lain-lain na siya.
we have,
So, mingon mo
despite
kang
all
question number 1 ang
weaknesses
answer letter A
we
kanang
have as a
first nga
Human Rights
kuan select.
Commission.
I-select mo na answer. Murili mo siyang kauban, siguradong ugbok inyong kauban.
In terms of ICHR
No?
responses to Myanmar
like,
situation, ICHR released a press statement on the 5th of February, just 4 days after the coup, but it was only signed by 4 countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Singapore. On the 9th April, ICHR press release on the activity on the meeting include the concern on escalation of violence, the concern over the escalation of violence. This is the first time that ICHR looking at this issue specifically on country. Usually we call it, we can express our concern in relation to the respect of human rights during COVID-19. So it's very general. But this time on the 9th April, ICHR as a whole, 10 countries expressed the concern over escalation of violence in Myanmar and expressed readiness to assist Myanmar on the task assigned by ASEAN member states. So this is the first time that ICHR come up with this kind of statement. And then specific agenda on human rights situation. I usually use that agenda to talk about situation in Myanmar. So we have that agenda since April meeting, July meeting, April 2021, July meeting, November meeting, and then just last month in March meeting, we have that specific agenda to talk about human rights issue. And ICHR Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, as well as the National Human Institution in the region, organize regional human rights forum on Myanmar. Supposed to be done in 3 regional consultation, but we only organized 2 regional conferences. Some representative like myself issue personal statement in relation to Myanmar situation or op-ed in the newspapers in relation to Myanmar. So these are some of the explanation about what we have done as ICHR and also as ICHR Indonesia. This is the statement. I make it public on my statement inside the ICHR meeting or outside of ICHR meeting for people to recognize that it is possible. It seems like ICHR did not do anything about Myanmar, but actually we are doing as we can in terms of some of the things that we cannot do as a regional organization, I can do as Indonesian representative. But so far, we are trying as much as possible to address the situation of Myanmar, to express our concerns, not only the concerns among members, among ICHR representative, also we use the opportunity when we meet with the foreign ministers every August to express our concerns on the situation in Myanmar. This is my oral intervention as well during the ICHR meeting in relation to Myanmar. I make it public. It is available. The complete text available in the Facebook of ICHR Indonesia. If you would like to know what have been said in the ICHR meeting in relation to Myanmar human rights situation post-coup. Now, ASEAN role in addressing Rohingya refugee. This is a very long issue in Rohingya, in Myanmar, as well as in ASEAN. But ASEAN has been tabled, the issue started when a group of people, Rohingya, stranded in Andaman Sea in 2015. So you can see here some of the responses, the meeting of ASEAN to respond to the situation in 1 year, May 2015, July 2015, September 2015. The end result from this series of consultations, unfortunately, frame the refugee issue as irregular movement of person. And when refugee framed into irregular movement of person, it becomes a security issue. It's not longer a refugee issue, which is human rights issue. So when you put this in the box of security, the treatment to the people categorized as irregular movement of person will be different. So that's the implication. But there are a number of initiatives such as task force established to address this situation. Also funds also established for this particular situation. So the way ASEAN respond to the situation through dialogue, through meeting to come up with a consensus, and then institutional changing, institutional development, procedures, funds, and so on and so forth, because they are the executor governments. So they need to work, they need to respond situation. But unfortunately, in this situation, Rohingya as refugees are not necessarily recognized, but rather the issue of stranded boat people in 2015 got the new frame of issue, which is the irregular movement of person. Okay, so in terms of Rohingya, maybe you can see the word, you will not see the word Rohingya in the ASEAN official documents, but rather Rakhine crisis. You can see it in a joint communique. Joint communique is the document as an outcome of the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting, or chairman's statement. Chairman's statement is a document as an outcome for us from ASEAN summit produced by leaders. So in these two documents, for instance, it always mentioned about Rakhine crisis. So the word Rohingya was not there, the word refugees was not there, but responses to refugees like durable solution, addressing the root causes are there. And as ASEAN has identified its role in Rakhine crisis to provide humanitarian assistance, to facilitate repatriation process from Cox's Bazar to Myanmar, and to promote sustainable development in Rakhine crisis, Rakhine state. So this become the framework of ASEAN to gather supports from dialogue partners, as well as to monitor the process to provide both financial aids or technical support to Myanmar on this particular issue. What happened now? So due to COVID-19, process has been stopped for a while. And also Rohingyas in Cox's Bazar were reluctant to return to Myanmar because there was no guarantee of protection. Their citizens, their citizenship are not necessarily recognized, so they are very worried about going back to the country. So these are some of the efforts. I think I have the slides on how on what Myanmar and ASEAN has agreed. So AHA Center was assigned to come up with the preliminary need assessment. So the report's already out in 2019. And based on this preliminary need assessment, the scenario was there will be identification of refugees from Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh to be able to go back to Myanmar, but it never happened. The process never happened. So the comprehensive need assessment cannot be done, because comprehensive need assessment only can be done when the process of repatriation is begin. Since there is no process yet of repatriation, the comprehensive need assessment cannot be done. So these are still the agreement made in 2019, 2018 between Myanmar and ASEAN, which is not yet completed. So this is the presentation from AHA Center. Actually, they put what they have done from July 2017 in Marawi. I put Marawi here because AHA Center used the experience of helping Philippines in Marawi situation to be used in the experience of Rakhine situation in Rakhine State. So you can see here, this is, I do not want to summarize it because I was afraid of making some mistake. So I just copy what they have presented in earlier events. And so this, again, this is the chronology of the role of AHA Center in helping Rohingya refugees in Rakhine State and to have a repatriation from Cox's Bazar with all the pictures and consultation and so on and so forth. Still, so they have process until August 2021. I believe there are a number of processes right now, but we just do not know what happened. But AHA Center is now working on sending the humanitarian supports to Myanmar as implementation of 5-point consensus. Now, 5-point consensus. So from a Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, we now move to human rights situation or issues post-crisis, post the coup. Let's look at 5-point consensus that agreed by all ASEAN member states: cessation of violence, humanitarian assistance, constructive dialogue, visit Myanmar, and then special envoy. So many people believe that there is no movement in 5-point consensus, but I have a different opinion because I follow the situation. So for instance, in terms of envoy, now ASEAN has agreed on the procedures. The envoy will be the ASEAN chair's envoy to Myanmar. So this year is Cambodia as a chair. So Cambodia is the envoy. Next year, Indonesia will be the chair of ASEAN. Indonesia should prepare an envoy on Myanmar. So at least this procedures of appointment of envoy already agreed. ASEAN work very, very slow, and they have to deal with number of differences, non-consensus, but finally they come to certain point that they can move this forward. Cessation of violence is the responsibility of SEC, the Tatmadaw. So they have to stop, and also all parties inside Myanmar. Lack of implementation of this particular agreement lead the sanction of SEC to attend the ASEAN summit. ASEAN Charter does not have sanction to the members. So the situation of the coup has created a situation for ASEAN to do something that never happened before, unprecedented action to members. So to me, this coup in Myanmar changed the dynamic of ASEAN. So despite the fact that ASEAN has no mechanism, but at certain point, it can create a mechanism to respond to the situation. So this is the new development, I think, in ASEAN. If ASEAN dare and brave enough to take this position is already something unusual, not usual for ASEAN. Humanitarian assistance, it has been very slow, but on the 18th August, there has been a conference, pledges conference, and collected around $8 million in monetary pledges and in-kind contribution. And on the 6th May of 2022, there was a humanitarian assistance meeting, consultative meeting on ASEAN humanitarian assistance to Myanmar, which agreed on the assistant delivery framework, because there, since the ASEAN Point Consensus adoption in April 2021 until May 2022, almost 1 year, there was no agreement on how to distribute the humanitarian assistance. Access was not open for AHA Center to enter Myanmar. Some of the humanitarian assistance only can be dropped in the airport, and Red Cross of Myanmar was the one who distribute the humanitarian supports. But now, at least through this meeting, SEC, Tatmadaw has agreed that this AHA Center can go to Kaya, Magway, Saigang, Bago, Shan, and Rakhine. This is the areas near embracing Yangon. And there is ASEAN monitoring team established to monitor the vaccination program in Myanmar during this time. Dialogue has not been done. There is no development in this. SEC doesn't want to set a dialogue, claim that NUG and CRPH are terrorist group. Similarly, other groups also do not want to come to dialogue if SEC was there. So dialogue is the most difficult part in this time, but at least some of the areas of 5-point consensus gradually felt in. Visit Myanmar. The envoy has visited Myanmar in March, and the second visit will be in June. And I think my last slide here. Where is this? So ASEAN also asked to engage with UN system. I think number of formal and informal meeting already established with the UN system, such as in March and May. Special envoy of ASEAN met with special envoy of UN and also brief UN Security Council on the situation of Myanmar. Sorry for this. Thank you very much. Sorry for this technical problem.
No problem, Miss Yuyun. Thank you so much for that informative talk. Again, let's give Her Excellency Yuyun Wa Yuningrim a virtual round of applause for that very, very insightful and eye-opening talk. Terima kasih banyak, Ma'am Yuyun. Right. So I'd just like to highlight few points that I got on insightful points, no, that I've got on Miss Yuyun's talk. First is human rights. It's human rights. It is non-negotiable, and as what Dr. Sevilla said during his speech, human right is the most vital component of human existence. Hence, it should be recognized, acknowledged, respected, and protected. And also, it's very interesting that Miss Yuyun brought up the issue is not the universality of the UNHR, but rather the uniformity that it demands every country should be on the same phase and parameters in implementing HR policy. Maybe later we can further discuss this. And it's also eye-opening how the role of HR in the human rights crisis in Myanmar, on how they create a platform and agenda so they won't break the ASEAN way or the non-interference principle. So maybe later on during the open forum, we can also talk about it. So for our audiences, please feel free to type in and send in your questions in our Q&A box, and later we will read it and answer it live on our open forum part. Now, moving on to our next part of our program. To further enrich us in today's topic, we are very fortunate to hear the discussions from an international relations expert and a human rights specialist in reaction to the talk given by Ms. Yuyun Wa Yuningrum. The first discussant or reactor is a professional lecturer of Philippine Studies at the UP Asian Center. She is currently the chairperson of the CHED Technical Panel on Gender and Women's Studies. She is also the president of the Pi Kappa Phi International Honor Society. She served as the dean of the Asian Center, director of the UP Center for Women's Studies, and its deputy director for training and extension service. As a former dean, she helped strengthen the links of UP with other academic institutions in Asia by enhancing its faculty and student exchange programs and through the conduct of joint research and publications. As a faculty of the Asian Center for more than 45 years, she has helped in the development of the MA and PhD courses, as well as the establishment of the Tri-College Philippine Studies program. Please help me welcome our first reactor, Dr. Caroline Sobrichea. Please let's give her a big virtual round of applause.
Okay, can you hear me? Good afternoon, good evening to all of you.
Good evening, Dr. Sobrichea.
Miss Yun, terima kasih for a very comprehensive presentation. There is nothing more I can add to what you said, and I really affirm what you mentioned. As a senior faculty member, I had the opportunity to participate in many of these intergovernmental meetings because English was chosen as the language of ASEAN. Our former senators and our former political leaders really paved the way for the creation of the ASEAN community. I started as a research assistant and a documenter. I would carry the bags of my senior officials. So I truly appreciate your very comprehensive discussion. But allow me to say a few more statements about the language of human rights. It was a very tortuous journey. I remember having attended many ministerial meetings where nothing came out of it because of many reservations and objections. So the creation of our Intergovernmental Committee on Human Rights and the incorporation of the language of human rights into the ASEAN agreements, ASEAN using, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, and all the international laws coming from the United Nations has really paved the way. I truly appreciate too your discussion of the many challenges we are facing because of the principle of non-interference in the ASEAN. I just had my class the other day, and we had a long discussion on moving forward the challenges faced by Myanmar now. And of course, my favorite, I really loved her when she was removed from power. I think many of us in the ASEAN region really grieved. Allow me just to mention, because I am in women's studies, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. This is the human rights document around which many ASEAN countries adhere to. I briefly looked at the record of Myanmar because one of the dimensions of development issues in Myanmar, from my perspective, of course, is the dominance of gender inequality and the persistence of patriarchal norms and many manifestations of gender biases. Although Myanmar ratified CEDAW in 1997, it has managed to submit 3 reports already. And there's really this very earnest effort on the part of the Gender Committee of Myanmar to really look at the gender dimensions or gender issues surrounding the promotion of women's human rights. But there are, of course, many challenges, and many of the reports did not even reach. I know there was resistance when the committee tried to present it in an intergovernmental meeting. So in the report that we have seen, one of the many challenges faced by Myanmar at the moment, and of course because of the coup that happened, is the persistence of patriarchal norms and values, and the resistance of the Myanmar government to bring women into public leadership and governance. So there is a lot of support for women, but if they stay in their traditional roles, secondary household roles, in microfinance industries, small businesses, but getting them into top level decision making has been a very serious problem for this country. But anyway, because of our international human rights mechanism and the periodic report that we request countries to present, we are able, as you said, uh, we are able to influence informal negotiations, dialogue. I remember having attended many of these conferences where we will start by talking first to some of the representatives. So we will go to a restaurant or drink alcohol while discussing, so that when you get into the floor, there will be some consensus building. So we have informal dialogues, sharing of information like that, to be able to influence the representatives of these ministerial meetings. We managed to influence many ASEAN countries in some of the ASEAN human rights declarations or agreements. We participated in the creation of the ASEAN Declaration on Violence Against Women, and of course, the other gender-related declarations that ASEAN has now adopted. But in the last ministerial meeting, we were not able to attend. The Philippines still has two meetings that it has to host, but we have to cancel this because of COVID-19. So with that as a sharing, I really appreciate the comprehensiveness of your report, adding on the gender dimension of human rights violations and moving forward initiatives, no, in our region. So terima kasih, and thank you very much for allowing me to share my little inputs into your very comprehensive discussion, Ms. Yuyun.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Caroline Sobriche, for that informative sharing of your insights with regards to the gender aspect of human rights. Again, let's give Dr. Sobriche a virtual round of applause for that informative talk. Now, for our second discussant reactor, she is currently the president of the International Coalition Against Enforced Disappearances. She is the best known for her work on enforced disappearance, highlighting the issue of forced disappearances in the Philippines and Asia through her presentations in more than 60 countries. She participated in the drafting and negotiation of the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. By dint of her human rights advocacy at the national, regional, and international levels, she has received several human rights awards at home and abroad. Among these are the Emilio F. Mignone International Human Rights Prize given by the Argentinian government in 2013 and the Franco-German Ministerial Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law in 2019. Please help me welcome Ms. Mary Eileen Bacalso. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Mr. Samonte. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to greet you with greetings of peace based on justice. This is a very relevant greeting, especially in the Philippines nowadays after our May 9, 2022 national and local elections. So Dean of the Asian Center of the University of the Philippines, Dr. Henelito Sevilla Jr., our distinguished speaker, Her Excellency Yuyun Wayuningru, and former Dean of the Asian Center, Dr. Caroline Sobrichea, students, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to react to the insightful and very insightful presentation of Her Excellency Wayuningru. Congratulations for this initiative of holding this webinar on the case of Myanmar in the context of ASEAN, a topic which is one of the major and very relevant human rights issues, not only in the global south, but in the rest of the world. So on the 15th of December 2008, a charter of the Association of Southeast Asian States or ASEAN or ASEAN, whatever the best way to pronounce it, it entered into force. So this unprecedented development of the ASEAN is a breakthrough after more than 41 years since its establishment on the 8th of August 1967. The Charter is a legally binding instrument among ASEAN member states. And some of the key provisions of the Charter provides, among other things, and I quote, member states will adhere to the principles of democracy, the rule of law, and good governance, respect for and protection of human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and unquote. And the Charter also provides, among other things, that member states will ensure that ASEAN or ASEAN peoples live in peace with the world at large in a just, democratic, and a harmonious environment. Based on what we've discussed on the universality, and I would like to add indivisibility and interdependence of human rights and the ASEAN Charter provisions, the role of ASEAN in the present catastrophic situation of Myanmar is very critical indeed. Thanks again to Her Excellency Wayoning-Rom for providing us with a very comprehensive overview of her assessment on ASEAN's performance on human rights, taking into consideration its membership's cultural diversity. The apt enumeration of what ASEAN states did vis-a-vis national commitment and engagement is enlightening as we see their consciousness in incorporating human rights provisions in the respective constitutions, in the respective fundamental laws of the land. Of course, except for Brunei, which has no specific provision on human rights as mentioned in the slide. The Philippines is a very clear example of having one of the best constitutions in as far as human rights is concerned, considering its clear articulation of the Bill of Rights. And it is also a state that has ratified most of the core international human rights treaties, 8 out of the 9 international human rights treaties. Unfortunately, it hasn't even signed or ratified the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, of which we have been lobbying for many years. So that's very clearly illustrated in the PowerPoint. Yet, despite all this and the fact that many of the 10 ASEAN states have ratified many of the core international human rights treaties, as we know, there is a challenge in terms of implementation. So speaking of Myanmar, especially after the 1st of February 2021 coup d'etat, with the consequent killings, detention, torture, forced displacement, I can imagine how violated is Chapter 8 of its constitution, which, according to the slide, states that is entitled Citizen Fundamental Rights and Duties of Citizens. And if you look at the slide, 5 out of 10 ASEAN member states had established the respective national human rights institutions, or NHRI. And here in the Philippines, we have the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines. Surprisingly, Myanmar is one of the 5 states that has its own NHRI, and the 5 others don't have. I wonder how the Myanmar NHRI fulfills its multiple functions during the coup. It would be very interesting to hear from Her Excellency Yu Yun on this. Myanmar acceded to 4 out of 9 core international human rights treaties, but again, with its high statistics of displacements and violations of rights of women, as mentioned by Dr. Sobrichea, women and children, I should say, during the present military regime, I'm not sure how implementation is being done in terms of the 4 core international human rights treaties that it acceded. I believe that UN member states should take responsibility in calling Myanmar's attention in this regard. And I wonder how Myanmar fared during the 3rd cycle of the Universal Periodic Review, which occurred 6 days prior to the February 1st, 2021 coup. So on the Article 14 of the Charter states, as mentioned by Her Excellency Yu Yun, the establishment of what is now the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or ICHAIR for short. I clearly remember that it was, and perhaps still is, I'm sure it still is, looked upon with eyes of skepticism by civil society members. In a paper I once wrote when I was a student in PS 268 class, one of my informants, the late former Commissioner Mercedes Contreras Daninberg said, and I quote, "The possibility of iChairs being used as a cosmetic tool is always there. The same was said when human rights commissions were created. But indeed, some commissions did not do well most of the time. Yet there were times when commissions did well, or there had been aspects of the commissions that worked well. So as she said, having said this, an ASEAN human rights mechanism will remain as a window of opportunity for the relief of victims and the promotion of human rights. What is important is that with or without the iChair, civil society should continue to be vigilant and not leave things to institutions. So therefore, we have to look into the positive side, taking into consideration the limitations of the body. Another informant of the paper that I wrote was Attorney Carlos Medina, who further stated, and I quote, "But having the body itself is already a signal that human rights is a concern of ASEAN. The civil society has to do whatever creative means they can to make human rights body responsive to the human rights situation in the field." So now to go onwards on the situation of human rights in Indonesia that Her Excellency Yu Yun shared with us, we are really fortunate to have a vibrant civil society in Indonesia, from which our honorable speaker came from. So I've known her for many years, since many years ago during my frequent visits to her beautiful country, and through her leadership, but of course within the context and limitations of ASEAN as an intergovernmental body, ASEAN has initiated the activities mentioned, both for internal change of behavior of duty bearers, as mentioned, which is very important, and ensuring public participation, establishment of mechanisms for grievances, and upholding the rule of law, etc. So we would like to commend Indonesia for that. But what I am really looking forward to seeing is the resolution of the case of the assassination of Munir. So the staunchest human rights defender during his time. I worked with him. I was the Secretary General of the Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances when he was the chairperson of the same organization. And we were supposed to attend one of the sessions of the um, drafting and negotiation process of the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, but Munir was not able to make it. He was assassinated in a flight from Indonesia to Amsterdam via Singapore by a lethal dose of arsenic, which very sadly was, according to medical experts, was enough to kill 2 elephants. So Munir was not able to do it, to make it in that particular session, but I am proud to say that Article 24, paragraph 7 of the Convention on Enforced Disappearances is a paragraph dedicated to Munir. It says that families of the disappeared have the right to form associations. And that paragraph was initially opposed by several UN states. But after my intervention, when I took the floor and shared what Suchiwati experienced when she received a box with a dead chicken and with a letter threatening her that if she would continue the search for truth and justice, then she would be likened to that of the dead chicken. So with that sharing, no one among the members of the former Commission on Human Rights of the UN said anything, and that paragraph is there in the convention, and that is dedicated to Munir. So I look forward to a CN statement, or perhaps at least some of the member states about Munir. We should never forget Indonesia's staunch human rights defender, and in fact, the staunchest human rights defender during his time. So back to Myanmar case, in the context of ASEAN, we need to look back to ASEAN's history vis-a-vis human rights, during which the Second World Conference on Human Rights in June 1993, of which I attended, was held in Vienna. And that was there that human rights was first recognized by ASEAN upon reaffirming the consensus achieved. So during the conference, ASEAN committed itself to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms as set out in the Vienna Declaration on the 25th of June, 1993. And in the document under paragraph 16, it says, and I quote, "The foreign ministers welcomed the international consensus achieved during the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna from 14th to 25th of June 1993, and reaffirmed ASEAN's commitment to and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms as set out in the Vienna Declaration of 25 June 1993. So they stressed that human rights are interrelated and indivisible, comprising civil, political, as well as economic and cultural rights. And these rights are of equal importance." And unquote. In her presentation, Her Excellency Yu Yun clearly elucidated the purposes and functions of the body, which in summary includes promotion and protection of human rights, contribution to the implementation of the Charter, the promotion of human rights in the regional context, and the upholding of human rights standards. She also mentioned important achievements like the issuance of press statements, press releases, articles in the media, oral interventions. These are efforts which are indispensable, especially that Myanmar continues to bear the brunt of poverty, social injustice, incarceration, torture, forced displacement, sexual violence, and the like. further concrete efforts are surely much appreciated. And on the issue of Rohingya, while listening, I sent a message to a colleague in Bangladesh. I think Her Excellency Yuyu knows him, Adil Khan, Adilur Khan, who, when asked what he expects ASEAN to do on the Rohingya issue, he said that he wants to see ASEAN recognizing the killings of the Rohingyas as genocide, and secondly, providing shelter to the refugees and to support the education of young Rohingyas. So this is really a very difficult challenge, but I believe that with unity and solidarity among members of the civil society, there can be developments in the dynamics of ASEAN, as mentioned already by Her Excellency Yuyun. So beyond all this, we are aware that of the principle of non-interference, a clear impediment for the body in general and its individual member organizations in particular to fully act in the name of ASEAN. So crucial indeed is the role of civil society for the promotion, protection, and defense of human rights in Myanmar and in other ASEAN states as well. Maraming salamat po. Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Eileen Bacalso, for that feedback or reaction on um, Honorable Yuyun Yuning Room presentation. And now, after hearing all of these valuable insights from our speaker and discussants, I am sure that the audience has an abundance of questions in mind as well. And at this point, we will now proceed with our open forum. So again, you may type in your questions in the Q&A box. You may also choose to be anonymous. So before we start with the open forum, I would like to ask Miss Yuyun if you'd like to give your response to the reactions of our of Miss Dr. Sorbrichea and Miss Bacalso.
Thank you very much for the reaction. First, I think to answer the question in relation to the Myanmar National Human Rights Commission during the coup, civil society in Myanmar has been expressing their concerns over the silence of action from National Human Rights Commission of Myanmar. And but so far, the National Human Rights Commission of Myanmar continue to engage with the rest of the NHRI through the SANEF, Southeast Asian National Human Rights Institution Forum, and activities. In ICHR, we have established a regular meeting between ICHR and the National Human Rights Institutions in which Myanmar National Human Rights Commission participated. But its lack of response and being independent to the situation of human rights post the coup from the National Human Rights Institution of Myanmar has been the concern of civil society as well as for us. But regardless, maybe they have a lot of limitation, but it shouldn't stop us from ICHR, individual country, or ICHR as a regional organization to be able to address the problem. Very often, those who are living in the country holding certain position are in very dangerous situation. We have also some diplomats that are in house arrest after the coup. It's already 1 year already. We see some of the governments in NLD government now house arrest or being arrested already in the detention center inside Myanmar, regardless whether they join what is this the movement or not. If SEC or Tatmadaw consider them as not following and not joining the instruction from SEC, there are a number of consequences. So I have that kind of situation with some of the people I know from governments in Myanmar, as well as civil society from Myanmar. And yeah, I agree with Dr. Caroline on the persistence of patriarchal values. I think you remind me on the fact that supports available for women with the condition if they follow or they show obedience to the common norms in the region. ICHR has not focused its work so much on the issue of women and children, because there is an ACWC, ASEAN Commission on Women and Children, as well as there is the ASEAN Committee on Women, who look over the gender mainstreaming. Now ACW come up with the strategic framework on gender mainstreaming and social inclusion, which has been appreciated by civil society in the region, especially from women organization, that ASEAN has been moving progressively in terms of gender mainstreaming. In the role of ICHR is to ensure that the right of women has been respected and included, as well as the participation of women. ASEAN Human Rights Declaration Article 4 mentioned very clearly that the right of women are human rights, the right of children are human rights. So that's a blanket statement that has been useful for us in ICHR to address a number of issues. As well as there is a guideline in ICHR. Whenever we develop a concept note, we have to address the most marginalized group, the most vulnerable group, as well as gender mainstreaming. So this becomes our guideline. And if we cannot prove that this project fulfill these all categories, perhaps we cannot get consensus. Thank you.
May I ask an additional question, Madam? What has ICHR dealt with issues? Because I just finished my class and I had Myanmar reports coming from my student. Has ICHR dealt with problems dealing with violations of human rights on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity? Because Myanmar really does not recognize the rights of LGBTs. Can you give us a little insight on this? Have you had reports and what you have done around it?
Thank you very much, Dr. Caroline. On the issue of SOGI, ICHR as a regional organization has not been able to address it with consensus. Some countries disagree on this particular issue. We had one application from ASEAN SOGI Caucus to be affiliated with ICHR, but it was rejected because of the issue. Some countries feel uncomfortable having one civil society organization affiliated with ASEAN, with ICHR, with this kind of work. But individual country representative of ICHR did what they can do to engage with the group, with ASEAN SOGI Caucus, with organization, LGBT organization in their own countries, to be able to convey some issue or some development, or to listen some grievances. But so far, not yet. In the opportunity of using agenda item 4 in the meeting of ICHR, I have not addressed the issue of SOGI as well. one case already submitted to us from Indonesian, from ASEAN of the caucus addressing the Indonesian case. I've been following the case. For the next ICHR meeting, I should be able to address the problem together with ICHR representative.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Yuyun. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabuchea and Ms. Eileen. We have here first question. It's an anonymous question from one of our attendees. It says, what exactly is the role of the youth in helping support ICHR against dealing with these problems?
The role of UN?
Youth. The role of the youth. Youth. Yes.
We have been number of, in my capacity as ICHR Indonesia, been engaging with ASEAN youth in the ASEAN region to discuss a number of things in relation to the coup, as well as on human rights issues in general, and build the capacity of ASEAN youth. With the ASEAN Youth Forum, for instance, we have series of webinars, and they come up with research, they come up with their own position. There was a premise that I've been reading number of essays, academic essays, but they're actually looking at certain points in which I think youth should have their own thinking, should not be driven by what people around talk about ASEAN, because our time with their time is very different. Now, my time 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, engaging ASEAN, the context has been changed dramatically. I can say, as because I'm now in ASEAN. Before I work as a ICHR representative, I was people around me, but not in many Indonesian government always said to me, be independent, listen to your follow your principle on human rights. But people beyond Indonesia always give me advices. Pick the hanging fruit. Use this hanging fruit as an opportunity to get the consensus. My first 3 months in the ICHR negotiation, I found that if I only do the easiest one, I will not be able to learn. I will not be able to shake ASEAN member states in terms of human rights, knowing that human rights are already sensitive. So then I changed the approach. I push my envelope, and then I know I'm going to be rejected, but this is something that I can learn from the ASEAN member state. What works, what doesn't work, what can be accepted and not can be accepted, and then in that sense, I also can see how member state changed from 10 years ago until now. This is something that I convey to young people that engage with me as a representative of Indonesia, and now we are preparing for ASEAN model meeting. So how negotiation can be made, how to push certain situation, because the ICHR negotiation is not only to get something, but also to learn position of our peers. And young people should not be afraid of pushing the envelope. And the training should start now. We cannot wait until the youth become the diplomats. They can start now because they are diplomats themselves in bringing the youth issues in the ASEAN attention. And in terms of opening, I think more and more ASEAN member state and ASEAN institution open to listen, more open compared to before, to listen more to the young people. Maybe still artificial, but at least there are some efforts from ASEAN organs and institutions to listen more to the voices of young people. So young people, please prepare yourself, define your issue, define your solution, and be able to present this in the diplomatic engagement, conversation, forum, platform with ASEAN diplomats.
Thank you for that, Ms. Yuyun. I totally agree. Youth is very essential when it comes to human rights conversation. They have the capacity to popularize this discourse to the mainstream or to mainstream this discussion, and they have all the energy, to push for their advocacies, to push for their calls grounded on human rights principles. And I'm really glad that the ASEAN has a program for the youth to help them, enhance their ability to advocate, to be an advocate or a change maker or the change makers of the nations. So for our next question, I think Dr. Sevilla raised his hand. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, first of all, let me congratulate Madam Yuyun. Thank you for that very insightful and comprehensive presentation, and also the reactors. I just would like to follow up on the issue of universality and uniformity. I hope you could explain more about the issue of uniformity, because you made mention that it's not really about universality. It's about putting or making a uniform recognition or practices. Now, I would like to ask if there are specific cases or issues that that ASEAN member states have discussed on in order to that requires alignment of their policies and recognitions about the declaration.
Thank you very much. Now we are in the process of implementing ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So this kind of universality versus uniformity, this debate are not necessarily appear that bold. But during the process of developing the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, for instance, some member states said that we embrace human rights, universality of human rights, but we cannot establish a mechanism similar with what many member states think. For instance, on the National Human Rights Institution, some countries in ASEAN refuse to establish one. They want to have a commission on anti-discrimination rather than human rights, with number of reasons. For instance, human rights continue to be very sensitive because it's more on naming and shaming, and division about duty bearer and right holders appear in number of discussion. And they also argue that our problem is not human rights compliant. Our problem is more on discrimination because we come from a different ethnicity, a different religion, different groups. So we are very diverse country. So that's one of the argument. Another one is that some countries said we would like to express, or we would like to establish mechanism, activities, program, approaches to human rights in our own term, in our own way. Not necessarily our context should be similar with our the context in Europe or in North America or in Latin America. We have our own context. We have our own capacity, which is quite different. So this kind of uniformity in terms of mechanism, procedures, approaches that ASEAN member states refuse to have, but rather they want to do it by themselves. As you can see, National Human Institution have a different powers from one country to another, and then it developed according to the context. Indonesian National Human Institution, for instance, was established by presidential decree in the beginning, but then gradually it moved and enlarged and stronger with the law. Similarly, National Human Institution of Philippines, for instance, before only addressed civil political rights, but now expanding to economic, social, cultural rights. So this kind of development, this kind of context that ASEAN members would like to receive more respect.
Uban ako nang research.
So that's
ninyo kung musuon
the
mo,
rejection
share
of
lang ko ninyo,
uniformity and
guys.
embrace
Thank you.
universality. But if you go a little bit deeper, how now in this current context we can say that ASEAN member states respect universality. Looking at, we can check whether they follow universality is through the reservation and declaration to the convention. So, for instance, some countries, all countries in ASEAN ratify CRC, Convention on the Right of the Child, but some countries come up with some declaration and reservation. The argument no longer use culture. Some still use. So, for instance, on the right of children to religion, this is a very, very sensitive issue because in the CRC said a child can choose, can own their own religion. But in our culture, no, it is not possible. Children religion should follow parents' religion until they are grown up. So this is something that member state cannot accept. So that is why I think Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia have a reservation on this particular issue. Right to education in the CRC Singapore has a reservation on this because they want to ensure all Singaporean children education will be fulfilled, but not the non-Singaporean. They have to pay. And then a number of declaration from member states, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and Singapore, Brunei also make a declaration. They said we follow what in mentioned in the CRC as long as it is compliant with our constitution and national law. So for this argument, we cannot say that ASEAN member states refuse universalism. When they use culture, then maybe they're still resistant to universalism. But reservation and declaration can be removed. Like Indonesia now has no reservation anymore to CRC, but some countries still there. So we cannot say that ASEAN members that permanently against universalism because it always evolve from time to time. The context change, the regime change. So for this point of history, maybe they are resisting universalism, but in the other point of history of time, they already removed this all reservation or declaration. So that's the examples.
Terima kasih.
Okay. Dr. Sabrichea, do you want to add something?
Sorry, I talk too much.
It's fine, Doc.
I just want to share with you what we are doing in the Commission on Higher Education because I chair the technical panel. And our route of influencing ASEAN countries is via higher education. And our agenda, of course, is try to bring in the human rights language. But as you mentioned, because of differences in religion, culture, and political structures, we have been trying to come up with an agreement for the last 10 years, I think. But we have draft, and after one meeting, we have another draft, and hopefully, as you said, we are able to move forward. And what we do in the Philippines is we try to come up with meetings, and we try to influence through negotiations, through some of the ASEAN leaders of higher education. So that's just my way of sharing with you how we can move forward, because it is by infusing the language of human rights in educational platforms that we can really sell the philosophy and concepts of human rights. My last question is, there is a strong pressure on some ASEAN countries to declare right of abortion. And I have not been able to respond to this because it's against our constitution. What does the what is the human rights framework on this? That's my last question, and I'll shut up. Thank you very much.
In the current batch, I think from 2019, we did not talk about right to abortion. But the earlier batch, the first and second, I come across the information that they also talk about it. Some countries, ASEAN members, as usual, divided in terms of right to abortion. And then since then, there was no discussion anymore. I think that was they discussed that because they talk about SDG in relation to maternity or something. I cannot remember, but
Rape, unwanted rape, and all these violations of human rights.
yeah. So far in the last 6 years, I haven't heard anything about that to discuss in ICHR. I talk about sexual violence more on the action, not the impact of that yet. So we have not discussed in detail and to be able to come up with a position on the right to abortion.
Okay. Thank you so much, Miss Yuyun. And thank you so much for that question, Doc Sabrichea. Okay, I have here another questions. I think this is for all of our speakers, Miss Yuyun, Doc Sabrichea, and Miss Eileen. The question is, it's from an anonymous attendee. Given the current situation of Myanmar, the humanitarian crisis, economic crisis, mishandled COVID issue, presence of the junta, do you think that Myanmar will fail as a state?
That's too extreme. That's too early. And the guided question also talk about if the 5-point consensus fail, whether Myanmar will leave ASEAN. Yeah. Well, first, if I may to also answer this, if Myanmar will leave ASEAN, that's the decision of Myanmar. But ASEAN has no mechanism to remove members. Once you are a member, you become member forever. At least that's the rule as mentioned in the charter. But what we can learn now, what not mentioned in the charter can also implement it. ASEAN has breached the non-interference principle dealing with country-specific issue by having 5-point consensus. Even before, in ASEAN meeting, they mentioned about the dispute between Thailand and Cambodia over the temple in the border, and then so many issues, specifically and country-specific issue mentioned in the high-level meeting. So non-interference principle continue to be the norm of ASEAN way, but it always can be breached. One key for that is the agreement among member states, the consensus among member states. So many papers always blame the non-interference principle as the reason why ASEAN cannot move forward. It is a norm, it is a tool. ASEAN also have another tool. As long as you agree, you can come up with something. Like I also mentioned another example. In ASEAN Charter has no mention about sanction. Article 40 mentioned if there is a breaching of the ASEAN Charter, that issue need to be discussed in the ASEAN Summit. So it is unclear, that particular article does not have any information regarding what to be discussed in the summit, whether breaching of the ASEAN Charter, the values of ASEAN Charter, or the implication of the breaching. So it was unclear. But ASEAN come up with the sanction to a member who doesn't follow the agreement, 5-point consensus. This is the first time, and it was shocking actually that ASEAN can do that. So to me, I think all the evidence provide us with the example of if ASEAN members won, they can, regardless whether there is a rule or there is no rule. That's also become my ammunition in human rights, because human rights is a very, very difficult issue to be discussed. Sometimes member states always make a argument, oh, we don't have this kind of mandate because the TOR doesn't mention it. Because we don't have this, because we don't have that. As long as we come up with a consensus, whether you have the norm or not, whether you have norm or not, that can be done. So that's giving me more confidence on possibilities in moving forward with ASEAN. It doesn't mean that it is going to be easy. Of course, it is always difficult, but that's the reason why we are there, to be able to find ways led by the concerns and the aspiration of the victims. When I insisted on the agenda item 4, the only faces come to my mind is the faces of Myanmaris. How, if we don't have agenda item 4, how their concern can be listened, can be voiced, can be expressed, can be conveyed to the policymakers at the ASEAN level. Having agenda item 4 does not solve the problem in Myanmar, but with this agenda item, we express our concerns every single meeting on the situation in Myanmar. So the country now, we are unhappy with the situation in Myanmar. We are unhappy with the way you treat your citizen. So that's a situation now in ASEAN. But I always this all taught me that possibilities is always there, regardless our limitation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Miss Yuyun. Miss Eileen, do you want to add something?
I have a question for Miss Yuyun. If she can share some possible initiatives of the I-Chair, wherein such initiatives were so progressive that some, or at least one, of the ASEAN member states blocked it. And if yes, can you consider it as tantamount to the veto power of the members of the UN Security Council?
In ASEAN or in I-Chair?
I-Chair.
Oh, in I-Chair, I have that experiences. So for instance, in 2019, I mentioned earlier, I always table on the issue of Rohingya to be discussed as a regional concern, but it's always blocked by the argument of non-interference principles and the implication of it, then no consensus. If no consensus, then we cannot discuss. But I don't give up. I table again in the next meeting. I continue table it, and then until we had finally in that time Myanmar representative agreed to discuss it, but in retreat format. Retreat format means the meeting only attended by representative of I-Chair, 10 countries, plus sometime with ASEAN Secretariat, one person, sometime without the ASEAN Secretariat, no minutes, no notes, only discussion. And then we can be very, very frank about the situation. I got scolded, I scolded back, but that's one of the effort. I always see it as a process. Then after getting that retreat, the next meeting at table again. So persistence is very important, and I'm not sure whether you have this expression. You have to have a thick face.
Yes.
So because because it is not me. It is not about me. It is about how I carry the mandate, how I can sleep in the night, because I in this meeting I already try, fail, but next meeting I will try again. It gives me not a good feeling, but at least I've tried. But if I don't even try, that I keep thinking about it, and I get depression sometimes because I feel guilty. Yeah, uh, uh, why because I have the platform, I have the opportunity, I have the position, I have knowledge about the situation, and I don't use it. That's, I think, the worst situation. Being rejected is fine. Being a failed process also fine. I got criticized by civil society also fine. I criticized the government before, so it's fine. But I just have to be honest to myself that I need to do this because this is part of my responsibility. By the end of the day, I can say I have tried. So that's better. So um, I many people use this as a veto, but I think it's really contextual, context based on context. So, for instance, if you have series of opportunities, you got veto one, it doesn't matter. You can try again. But in the process of coming up with certain document, you have very limited time. Then the rejection become dangerous. Like ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, they have to work with certain time. So they have to remove something that they cannot agree. That is why number of rights are not there because they cannot reach consensus because they have very limited time. But if you always have the opportunity, there is no timeline, there is no deadline, then non-consensus is not a veto to me because you always can try and try and try and try.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yuyun. Thank you very much for your persistence. That's very much needed.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Yuyun. Thank you for that question, Miss Bakal. So yeah, I totally agree with Miss Eileen that and Miss Yuyun, persistent is the key for any human rights defender, especially now that we are facing, especially in the Philippines, we have another problem issue facing now after the election results. So we hope that this platform, this conversation will open the eyes of many people about what's happening now, and not just in the Philippines but in the world. Okay, so we have another question here for Miss Yuyun. It is from Cedric Barsena, one of the students of PS2A2. According to him, Salamat malam, Miss Yuyun. My name is Cedric Barsena, one of the students of PS2A2. I would like to express my appreciation for your time to share your expertise on iChare and for your very comprehensive discussion about the human rights issue in the region. I was intrigued by the concept of the three-step complaint mechanism that was introduced in 2011. Who can file a complaint? Do people need to course their concerns to their respective iChare country representatives? Based on my observation in the Philippines, there is a very low awareness on this mechanism, and would like to hear Indonesia's experiences on this mechanism, as well as how can the Philippines maximize this mechanism. That's all. Terima kasih banyak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the interest. So my experience in dealing with some of the incoming complaints in relation to Indonesia. I received complaints related to the corruption issue against the harassment against human rights defender who deal with corruption issue. Usually, regional and international human rights mechanism will have the requirement what kind of cases to be submitted. At least the cases that submitted to the regional and international system should use all the mechanism and process at the national level, and then victims feel that they have not received justice they deserve. So they can go to regional and they can go to international. But ICHR has not yet agreed on this requirement. So we receive everything under the sun in terms of cases. So because of no requirement, so I received these cases of human rights, the harassment against human rights defenders on corruption issue. I need to consult with the national system. So I went to Komnas HAM, the National Human Institution of Indonesia, check the extent of their intervention to the case. So they said we monitor the case because the case already received the court decision, and Komnas HAM was in the stage of monitoring the implementation of that the decision of the court. So knowing that, I have to stop my intervention because that's unethical for regional organization to deal with the cases that still under the national system. So then after I received this kind of stage of the, I report to ICHR. I received this case this date, and this is what I've done, and this is the updated status of the case, and that's stopped. And then I report back to the complainant that this is what we have done to your case. So we cannot move forward with the case because it is still at the national level. So so far we receive cases from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, but not from Myanmar or other countries. When I told Myanmar organization about this, they are very surprised and they wonder why there is no cases from Myanmar. And I said, please be careful because our system is very not ideal. Instead of the case will be addressed, there will be a retaliation because the system is based on the country in question should be the one to follow up the case. So the government may use your name and everything and search you and then have a retaliation. So my suggestion to Myanmar organization, if they have something to submit, they can send to me. I will be the one who present it in ICHR without mentioning their name, but the case, because I'm worried that there will be some harassment or retaliation because I resided in Indonesia and they are in Myanmar, so it's beyond my control. No, I cannot monitor what happened. So for you in the Philippines, you need to also consider this. If you think your security is compromised, then use the other way through individual representative that you trust, and the representative will be able to ask you your consent if he or she can present the case or raise the case in ICHR meeting using the agenda item 4 without name the sender to protect your identity. So that's possibilities. So far, there is no requirement. Anyone can submit their complaints. But for Indonesian NGO, I suggested them to do it using this mechanism because I can assure there will be no retaliation to them. At least until 2024, because I will be ICHR representative until 2024. If situation change, then they have to change their strategy. That's our limitation on complaint mechanism. So having complaint mechanism is a good news for us, but because it is not yet ideal, and we need to protect human rights defenders or those who send a complaint to us, then we have to have another strategy to make sure that security and protections are there.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Yuyun. I hope that answered your question, Cedric. I have here another question. I think that all of our panelists can answer this question. According to an anonymous attendee, how has human rights discourse and action in Southeast Asia informed human rights discourse and action in general? And how would you respond to someone who argues that the framework of human rights is basically incompatible in our context because it is a liberal modern Western construct? Alternatively, how do you think we can tell if the framework is legitimate in a particular context? And are there any alternative frameworks to human rights, or do you encounter basic theoretical flaws and limitations in the human rights framework that have been addressed by the exigencies in the Southeast Asia and so transform the framework to make it more suitable, effective, and legitimate? Thank you so much. Um, who wants to go first? I think,
Maybe I can start.
yeah, go ahead, Miss Yuyun.
I think in terms of general human rights, already domesticated in constitution. So this is something that we can hold on. And number of discourses in different countries always make an argument that human rights should be contextualized. But if you look at Vienna Declaration on Program of Action, it mentioned about the promotion of human rights, follow the culture, respect the cultural particularities, not the protection. If you look at again the Vienna Declaration of Human Rights, which has been criticized widely of having a dual approaches of recognizing universality and accepting particularity, it make a very clear mention only the promotion that should respect cultural particularities, context, and so on and so forth, not the protection. That's one point. Second point, human rights cannot be seen as just general. There are derogable rights and non-derogable rights. The non-derogable rights is cannot. This is the rights that cannot be removed. That cannot be discounted. Cannot be taken away from you because you are human. Right to life, right to freedom from being tortured, freedom from being working as forced labor or slavery, and so on and so forth. So these are common everywhere, regardless your nationality. But the other rights can be limited, like freedom of expression, freedom of association, opinion. These can be limited, but the limitation has been arranged, has been ruled by a number of situations, public morality, public health, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of arrangements why certain freedom can be limited. So because sometimes during the pandemic, for instance, there are a number of protests from civil society on the limitation of right to movement, right to speak, express, and so on and so forth. But then the response from some governments looking at using this cultural particularism argument. In fact, they don't have to use this argument because this freedom can be limited as long as it is necessity, legality, and proportionality. In making limitation, and limitation cannot be forever. It should be proportional, only when needed. So I think this is the responsibility of every one of us, including youth, to be able to clear the discussion of human rights. It is not about the West or the East. It is about the promotion of human rights that can be different because of the language, because of the culture, and so on and so forth. But the protection continue to be the same, and not all human rights are absolute. There are non-derogable rights and derogable rights, and that's need to be very clear. And so I think this kind of discourses can help to shape the way we discuss about human rights. Um, Very often I see when we talk about human rights as human rights, general human rights, there are a lot of uh, discourses, but when we detail what is in human rights, personal security, right to vote, and so on and so forth, we come into some agreement. So, so perhaps when we talk about human rights, we need to detail what human rights that we are talking about. So then the discussion will be more down to earth.
Thank you so much, Miss Yu Yun. Um, who would like to go next?
Just a short comment. I spent a great deal of my long life fighting for the language of human rights. I was still a young faculty member. I would go to Geneva. The platform of human rights, I always tell my students, for the entitlement, for as long as you belong to the Homo sapiens sapiens, you're entitled to the fundamental human rights. But the narrative of human rights, when it developed, was really the principles to engage the state. I always tell my students that people can commit rebellion, but the most horrific forms of crimes are committed by state powers. So this is the reason why we agreed in the Geneva Convention to come up with the human rights language for regional and international bodies to intervene in the event that there is torture happening during coup d'etats, there is incarceration, rape and torture, and all of this. So I think human rights is one of the most important achievement that this world has created. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sobrichea. Miss Bacalso?
Um, Briefly, I agree with Dr. Subrichea that human rights is one of the greatest, and in fact, the greatest achievement the human rights, the humanity has ever produced, has ever achieved, has ever attained. So I would like to, if there are questions like this, I'd like to go back to the situation. In every country, human rights are inali- inalienable. It's inherent in us. So they are universal, as human rights violations are happening everywhere, indivisible, uh, because economic and social and political rights are not separated from civil and political rights. They are interdependent. So human rights is for everyone. It's not just because of the geographical location of some people, but it's universal. Everyone has a right. So it's not a question of it's a Western concept. So it's something universal. It's something that everyone should know because it is inherent in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, Miss Bacalso. And I think that concludes our open forum. Thank you so much for your insights, for that comprehensive discussion about human rights in the global south, in the context of ASEAN, Dr. Sabrichea, Miss Yuyun, and Miss Eileen. And we appreciate the interest in this webinar's topic as exemplified by the multitude of queries we have received this afternoon, or this evening perhaps. However, due to time constraints, we will now close this open forum. Now, for everyone's information, we will send later the evaluation form in the chat box, and we are looking forward to your feedback regarding the webinar. Now, moving on to the next part of our program, to showcase our deepest appreciation for allotting their time despite their busy schedules and for providing valuable insights in this webinar and discussion. We would like to call again Dr. Henelito Sevilla to present the certificates to our speaker, Her Excellency Yuyun Wayuningrum, and our two discussants, Dr. Caroline Sobrichea and Miss Mary Eileen Bacalso. We will also be joined by Miss Chrissy, the representative of Philippine Studies 282 class.
Thank you, Julius. Can we just ask Chrissy to present and read the certificate for our esteemed speakers and two reactors?
Okay, sir. Ayan. So good evening. Hello. On behalf of our class, PS282, this certificate of appreciation is presented to Honorable Yuyun Wayuningrum for her valuable contribution as the resource speaker during the webinar Human Rights Issues in the Global South, the case of Myanmar in the context of ASEAN, organized by this class, given the sixth day of June 2022 at the UP Asian Center, Diliman, Quezon City, signed by Dean Henelito Sevilla. We present this to you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Salamat. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Madam. Can we proceed giving of certificate to our two reactors?
So to proceed, this certificate of appreciation is presented to Caroline I. Sobrechea, PhD, for her valuable contribution as a reactor during this webinar. So thank you very much, Dr. Sobrechea. And last but certainly not the least, so this certificate of appreciation is presented to Miss Mary Eileen D. Bacalso for her valuable contribution as a reactor during today's webinar. Thank you so much, ma'am. So on behalf of the class and all of the participants here, we truly appreciate all the insights shared today for this webinar. Maraming salamat po.
All right. Thank you, Chrissy, for presenting the certificate. Now we have again Dr. Henelito Sevilla for the closing remarks of our event this evening.
Can we have photo ops first?
Oh, okay.
We invite everyone, classes, students. Sino ba ang kukuha? Can you open the cam, guys?
I'll take it. Okay. Okay. So let me take it. 1, 2, 3, smile, everyone. Again. 1, 2, 3, smile. All right.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have heard an excellent exchanges of ideas concerning the topic, no? On human rights, the issue of Myanmar, its universality, its relativity, as well as putting it in different contexts. We also heard different perspectives, and we heard that I think we all agree that human rights per se are universal, and that is something that we really have to seriously follow. No, I also would like to emphasize that education about human rights should also be disseminated not just to the practitioners, to the students like us, to the policymakers, but also should also be given, no, should also be shared to every individuals who are considered to be the doers and the subjects of human rights. No, so with this, I would like to congratulate the speaker, Madam Yuyun. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to invite you in the next round of our discussion about human rights in the context of ASEAN. Similarly, I would like to congratulate and thank Professor Caroline Sobrechea, my senior, my idol, and Ms. Mary Eileen Bacalso, who have contributed a lot in the discussion and enlightened some of the points that we, students of human rights, probably need to know and understand. I also would like to acknowledge the effort of my students, the PS282 students. Congratulations, and thank you very much for organizing this very memorable event. No, in our class, in the history of our class for the entire semester. This is your output, and congratulations. Also to the participants and friends of UP Asian Center, thank you very much for attending this very important and timely forum on human rights. With this, again, thank you. Magandang gabi. Terima kasih banyak-banyak. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat. Terima kasih. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Sevilla. And once again, thank you to our dear speakers and reactors. This is a great conversation. We've seen and we've heard that countries from the global south are indeed vulnerable to human rights violations. Hence, upholding and protecting the dignity of its citizens must be prioritized. The very essence of our existence and humanity is what makes us entitled to be protected from any human rights abuses and violations. Whether we come from different cultures and hold different beliefs, we are entitled of human rights to protect our human rights. Now, the challenge is to popularize this conversation. Go outside of the four corners of this Zoom webinar. Talk to your peers, mainstream the discourse, because we need to popularize and we need to echo and amplify the message that we've gathered here in today's event. Again, thank you so much to everyone. Now we will send the feedback form on the chat box. I hope our attendees would give us a few minutes to gather all your insights and feedback regarding this event. And thank you as well to everyone who attended this webinar. This event is brought to you by the UP Asian Center. Hence, we'd like